Welcome to another recording of Two Geeks and a Marketing Podcast. We are back for more news, tech, content, and wisdom from the world of marketing. Joining me, a co-host, a marketing speaker, and consultant who spent his whole career helping his customers get their marketing simple but effective. He's the author of 𝗏𝗲 Marketing Plans and the creator of the Roger video series. I give you Mr. Roger Edwards.
Well, thank you so much. And of course, my co-host is a digital marketing veteran. He's a speaker, trainer, and advisor with nearly 3 decades of experience, who enjoys revealing visual storytelling techniques to help you build better online campaigns faster. All the way from La France, please welcome Monsieur Pascal Fintoni.
Thank you very much for the introduction. Yes, this remains an international production. Thank you to all of you and listeners. A quick shout out to Making Sang, who's done some great tweets, who stumbled upon our bloopers, Roger, and had a well of a time going through them, but also a brand new YouTube subscriber, Ian Sutherland, who's joined us over the weekend.
Oh yeah, Making has played an absolute blinder. And do you know what? I mean, I as you said, I often watch the blooper reels just to cheer myself up. But the Making did a video of herself watching the blooper reel and laughing and laughing and laughing, and her laugh is so contagious. I was in hysterics as well. It's almost like contagious laughter going all over the internet. So Making, every time I watch you watching the bloopers, it makes me happy.
Oh, very much so. So thank you very much for that. It was a three level of laughing. We could see ourselves on video. We could see Making laughing, and then we were laughing at the whole thing. Superb. But you know, in a way, when we started this 3 years ago, during the pandemic, it was born out of having almost daily phone conversations to cheer each other up and lift our spirits. And one of us, if not at the same time, we said, we should recall this because perhaps this conversation will help others as well. And here we are 3 years later, episode 102.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. And we've come such a long way.
No, we have indeed. So we're going to go through our usual segment. We're going to begin with In the News. Then we'll complete our journey of rediscovery, what it means to be a marketer and business owner to this economy with film marketing. And it was your turn to choose today's film.
Yes, indeed. And we're going back to a Bond film and talking about refreshing and rebooting. We're going to have a look at Casino Royale from 2006. Crikey, how long ago is that now? And it still feels to me as if it's a recent film, but a landmark Bond film, a reboot, complete change of direction for the series, and really excited to be talking about that one later.
Indeed, and with the marketing challenges that came with it, because it was 4 years since we had to, we had obviously Pierce Brosnan with, oh goodness, is it another...
Die Another Day.
Die Another Day, yeah. I nearly gave you the French version there. So, as a marketer's 4-year gap, how do you engage with the audience? How do you introduce new characters and so on? I just can't wait to chat to you about it. But before we do so, let's move in with our first segment, In the News.
The importance consumers place on price in their purchase decisions has risen by an average of 5% compared to the start of the pandemic. By comparison, the importance placed on sustainability has remained consistent since before COVID, fluctuating by a maximum of 1%.
Well, listen to this. The often overlooked P of price seems to be out of favor with marketers in the current economic climate, as 4 out of 5 rank defending and growing profit margins through price the least important task for a marketing department.
A lobby group, UK Finance, has written to the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, requesting tech companies take responsibility for payment fraud on their platforms, specifically Meta, who is connected to over 60% of all push payment fraud.
According to research by recruitment company Hays, 78% of marketing employers are not currently using AI in their work. The top reason given is a gap in knowledge and the lack of awareness of the benefits at 40%.
Virgin Voyages has launched the Gen AI invitation tool. Soon you will be able to send an AI-generated message from Jennifer Lopez to friends and family about joining you on your next trip.
Okay, well, an advert on LinkedIn for a head of operations, Tesla Electric Retail Energy, revealed Tesla's intention to move into the UK energy market. It is understood there will be a specific emphasis on the individuals who own the latest Tesla Powerwall home battery.
The popular podcast app 𝗧𝗵𝗲 will officially close on the 29th of August, just over 15 years after it was first launched. Subscribers can still listen to podcasts within the SiriusXM app, whilst others will have to find an alternative.
Well, that's me. Everyone is talking about the marketing of the movie Barbie, from the BBC to Forbes to the Marketing Society to 𝗬𝗲 𝗏𝗀𝗀 and many others, all praising the film marketing strategy approach, in particular partnerships.
Ooh.
Wow, what a set of news. Can I go back to the very, very start? Because I'm very perplexed, Roger Edwards, about price. So this being, the number one, I mean, we've been actually, in the news, as I've said before, is almost like the barometer of what goes on the consumer side, in particular, B2B, B2C, or P2P. So of course, people are concerned about, price. I'm staggered that price, as part of the 4 7 Ps, depending on how you want to look at it, is seen as the least important. They should at least be of equal importance. Where do you stand with that?
Oh, this is just depressing, isn't it? I mean, it backs up something that we've been saying on the show right the way back to the first episode, is that marketing these days is unfortunately seen as just promotion. And I actually genuinely think that, unfortunately, a lot of marketers out there either have never been taught the entire discipline, which includes price, of course, or they are given no responsibility for it, and indeed they are told just to focus on promotion. So on the one hand, it's understandable that if you're not responsible for the P of price and you're only responsible for the P of promotion, then you're not going to focus on it, are you? And that may be the people here who have ranked it the least important. But for people like us, who have always said that the marketing discipline is a much wider area of responsibility, from research to product development to strategic goals to targeting and positioning and price and product and place and promotion, it's absolutely core to the marketing mix. And your business needs to make money. It needs to make profit, it needs to cover its costs, it needs to grow. And to see that people see it as the least important is genuinely worrying. From the point of view that it proves that marketing as a discipline is shrinking, but secondly, you can't run a company and think that what your price is not important. It just staggers me.
And maybe you're onto something which has been removed, from someone's brief, because my memory is very clear on that one. Once I decided that marketing was something that I would be passionate about, and in fact, I would argue was more about customer experience, and as a result of which, the marketing comes out of that. I'm sure promotion was the last of the consideration once you've established what the product is, the place message, process people, and all the others, and price, of course. And then what on earth you're meant to be communicating to your customers. And so I find that the whole thing just a little disappointing, like you, but also a concern, because what marketers do particularly well, and often they are not listened to, I'll grant you that, is they really understand, the current psyche and mood of the targets. And if, as we've known now I would argue almost for an entire year now, if price is of concern to your customers, you should be right in the middle of it and doing, like I say, comparisons. And if you want to essentially continue to sell a premium product at a high price, then you have to communicate to your customers why indeed the price is higher than most.
Yeah, and okay, imagine you are one of those people who is in marketing, but you have only been given responsibility for the P of promotion. It's undoubtedly the case that your P of promotion will be promoting the price at some point. It may be a buy one, get one free, or discount, or sale until the end of the week, or whatever it is, but you will be communicating at some point the price that your product is being sold for. And you should take an interest in that. Even if you're not responsible for it, you should be taking an interest in it to understand how it contributes to the profits and the margins of the business you work for. if you're a marketer who is responsible for the wider discipline, and I hope you are, then absolutely make sure that you're on top of this and understand it. You know, if you do make a decision to go out there and do a buy one get one free or a 10% discount, ask yourself whether that's eating into your margins too much. Could you get away with a 5% discount, or do you run the sale for a shorter period? Don't just immediately think, oh, we'll just do a discount and we'll pile out a load of communications about it. Learn how it works and how it fits in with the entire marketing mix.
No, absolutely. Let's move on to maybe my second surprise for this in the news segment. This business of AI not being used currently by 70% to 80% of marketing employers because of a gap in knowledge and lack of awareness. Either people live in the different planets that I do, but the lack of awareness, I can't believe a word of it. I mean, for goodness sake, there's not one article, there's not one feed, there's not one advert on social media that is not AI related. So there's something in there that maybe needs to be looked at. And then I want to link it to get your reaction about Virgin Voyages. I don't mind people experimenting with fun kind of tricks like, you know, an AI Jennifer Lopez, but my perception is that when you go on a holiday, it is not to be with your friends and family. You want a break from them. For what on earth would you send a message from Jennifer Lopez about come and join me on this amazing Virgin Voyages? But jesting aside, there's clearly still some disconnect between AI and its use. We may even talk about the Barbie marketing campaign. What do you make of this idea of lack of awareness of AI and its impact?
Actually, in some respects, it doesn't surprise me because you and I live in a bit of a marketing bubble, so we are going to be exposed to all the hype all the time. And let's face it, Pascal, we actively seek it out, don't we? Because we are wanting to be up to date with what's happening. I'm not sure that a lot of companies, you know, if you're doing the marketing for a cafe or something like that, you might not be even thinking about AI. I mean, I remember jokingly going up to the Sizzler's burger van at Fisher O'Harbor and asking them whether they'd included ChatGTP in their marketing plans, and the woman just looked at me and says, "What on earth is Chat?" Actually, she used a much more evocative phrase than "what on earth." It was "what the is ChatGTP?" But maybe some companies just aren't there. And again, I'm not sure that the definition of AI is actually understood. I mean, a lot of people, if you say AI to them, they immediately go to the sort of Arnold Schwarzenegger Terminator, I'll be back, Skynet, end of the world type of thing. Whereas I think a lot of times these days, a basic computer program, which is running a series of data points, is now termed to be AI. So a lot of companies who are using Excel spreadsheets to sift through data could probably claim that they're using AI, you know, because Microsoft has built in algorithms into its systems just like everything else. So I'm not sure that we have a common definition of AI that everybody in the world understands. So at the one end, you've got the Skynet end of the world, and at the other end, you've just got basic computer programs, and then anything in between could fit in with a definition of AI.
And indeed, this is such early stages, isn't it? I mean, if it wasn't for the fact that somebody probably, you know, made a rash decision to release ChatGPT, OpenAI, freely in the autumn of last year, but we're not even a year in. And I think what this is telling us is that it's just been the case. If I look back on my career and the evolution of digital marketing, each sector needs to have almost like a champion that says, you know, if you work in the food and drink industry, if you work in hospitality, if you work in the airline industry and motoring and all the other sectors, this is how, and this is our version of how we're going to be exploiting, you know, what AI can do to be more productive and creative and so on. And I think you're right. It's almost like, you know, a general message has been sent out there. And as we well know, with marketing, you can't do generic straplines. It just doesn't, you know, engage the audience whatsoever. I want to talk about the film Barbie, but like everybody else, the marketing of the movie Barbie. So it's not going to be "we told you so" moment from Roger and I, but we've been talking about film marketing campaigns for 3 years. I've done now, as of today, would be more than 100 reviews of marketing. The idea being you can learn from other sectors. So for me, it's more validation from brands like the BBC, Forbes, and so many other that they've talked more about the marketing of the movie than the movie itself. But here's the thing, Roger. I have not seen anything whatsoever on my feeds on social media and in my inbox and more about the movie Barbie. So whilst on one hand, people talk about digital and AI being super productive and hyper-targeted and so on, I don't think there's been a day in my entire life where I've not spoken about movies. Even at weekends, I post on Facebook about movies and what we've watched and so on. And how is it that, the clever marketers at Barbie and Mattel have not see it fit to tell Pascal about the amazing movie?
Well, I have seen adverts for it in
Good,
my Facebook
right.
feed, which goes to prove that maybe there's a bit of targeting here going on and that they've got it wrong in both respects, because I'm not interested in Barbie at all, and you probably are because you're a filmmaker. But that's beside the point. I mean, I have seen the odd advert, and to be perfectly honest, it didn't catch my attention other than the fact that there's a lot of pink in it, as you would expect. And obviously who's the actress who's playing Barbie and who's the actress that's playing Ken, assuming Ken's in it. I've not really looked into it. But the very concept of a Barbie movie just doesn't interest me at all. I just can't. What on earth would it be? Although on the other side of the coin, Toy Story isn't too far advanced, is it, from a story about toys? So yeah, I do admit to a certain curiosity, but it's definitely not a film I'll be going to the cinema to see, and it's probably not a film that I would buy on Blu-ray. I would probably wait until it streams, and as long as I can stream it for free, I might give it a look. But it doesn't attract my attention whatsoever. But I guess I'm not the target market.
Well, quite, yeah. But for me, it's just that, which is the validation of, here it is. People are talking about film marketing now in mainstream media, so that's good. But it still shows that it's not perfect, so for all of us, when we think about our marketing strategies and the components, if you're going to do a pie chart, if you like those kind of things, and the different kind of sources of leads and inquiries, you cannot put all, your hopes and wishes and budget on social media, because here it is. Someone like me, I would have fully expected to have been targeted because of behavior, historical data, and that kind of things, and it hasn't happened. So you've got to mix it up, and clearly this is what they've done. So, put it this: I want to reassure you, Roger, I have no intention to put Barbie in the list of film marketing potentials. We leave that to all the others, and we can read up about it. As always, immense fun to go through the news and get your reaction. But we're going to slow things down with the content spotlights just after this. Now, in this segment of the show, Roger and I deep dive into a piece of content. Could be an article, a video, podcast, something that can help us reflect what it means to be a marketer and a business owner in today's economy. So, Roger, what is your selection for today?
Well, this is a little bit different, Pascal, but it sort of maintains the AI theme that we've started within in the news there. This is an article, although it's an article showcasing a video that appears on YouTube. The article is called "Terrifying Ad Warns Parents Against Sharing Photographs of Their Kids Online." And it's on a website called, it's either 𝗵𝗲𝗄𝗄𝗃𝗄 or 𝗵𝗲𝗄𝗃𝗄. I don't know how you pronounce it. And the article is by Pascal 𝗵𝗲. Now, I watched this advert and I genuinely agree that it's a terrifying advert. They've made it very well. It's made like a little mini film, so there's a storyline in it. And of course, there's this terrifying message. And just to give you the very basics of it, it talks about how parents all over the world will think nothing of posting photographs of their children on places like Facebook and Instagram, wherever it might be. And those photographs could be, close-ups of their face. They could be playing on the beach. They could be in the park. They could be sitting at home in front of the TV. People don't seem to have a problem with sharing pictures of their children. Now, I must admit, when our son Andrew was growing up, we were a little bit reticent about putting photographs up. And when I look back through my memories on Facebook, I don't actually get that many photographs of Andrew coming up in the memories, because we took a decision not to plaster photographs of Andrew across places like Facebook. So what happens is the assumption is that people are quite happy to share photographs of the children. So the video starts off with mum and dad going to the cinema, and they've obviously left the child with a babysitter, and they go into the cinema and they sit down, and up onto the screen, all of a sudden comes an older version of their daughter, Ella, who they've left at home with the babysitter. And obviously, this older version of Ella speaks directly to mom and dad in the audience, and basically says, you know, you've been sharing photographs of me. You know, I'm only 9 years old, but in this film, I'm older. And she then goes into quite significant detail as to how people have taken those images of her as a 9-year-old child from Facebook, from Instagram, and manipulated those images in any number of quite scary ways, including pornography. And the way that they don't show anything like that, Pascal. You don't get to see, but the way that this child actually evokes what's happened, and also bear in mind that this older version of Ella is created entirely by AI, which is even more scary. It's really quite realistic. And she goes into all the consequences of what might happen, from pornography, as I've said, to trafficking, to just to identity theft. You know, they've upscaled a 9-year-old, made her into a 19-year-old, and used that to get a passport or to get a driving license. And really, you can see the two parents sat in the audience in this cinema with their AI older daughter talking to them, and you can see the sort of the dread creeping into their face. And obviously the message of the video is, you know, be careful. If you are going to upload photographs, you know, make sure that all the privacy settings are set up to the maximum level, so that only people that you can trust can see them. I mean, again, you know, there are days on Facebook when people come up in the birthday, say happy birthday to Bert Smith, and I'm thinking, I don't even remember who Bert Smith is. When did I accept his friend request? You don't know who you've got in your list. You don't know who's following you. And I think that quite a lot of people, despite the fact that we know that there have been massive data breaches and misgivings going on across all of these social media platforms, the amount of trust that we place in them is actually really quite scary. So that's it, Pascal. Nothing more than that, as to say it's a scary message to put out there, but it attracted my attention for two reasons. First of all, it fits in with our current debate about AI, but secondly, it's a remarkably good piece of filmmaking. It's only about 2.5 minutes long, but it's genuine. There's genuine story. You would love it as a film producer yourself, but it absolutely hits home and lands that message. And 𝗏𝗏 in the article does obviously do a critique of the video itself, and supports some of the conclusions.
Wow, thank you so much, Roger. You know, we didn't have time to go talk about this request from that lobby with regard to making platforms more accountable to being the source of, you know, many problems, including crime. But this is it. You know, for me, it's always been a mystery why the default position of a platform when you open an account is not to have your privacy setting to the max, and then you can choose to, you know, kind of unlock some of those, as opposed to having to find your way through the maze of settings and trying to do that. And I think for me, there's a couple of things: reaction to the power of short form communication. You know, what you can communicate and the emotional engagement you can have in the less than 3 minutes, as you've said, and the need to spell things out nowadays, because everything else, you know, my position would be, and I can't wait to now look into this more, is the you know, the simpler message out there of, you know, be careful and so on. I've not worked, so you've got to say it in story form, which I think is just you know, quite powerful. And interestingly, though, when you look at the stats, privacy concerns, you and I've reported this in the news, is like kind of very, very top. So for me, there would be an advantage for a platform to put forward the fact that with us, the way we've done things, your privacy is more secure than most. But it's a scary prospect, though. The combination of the wealth of information that we've shared about ourselves, sometimes just instantly,
Yes.
a birthday party or whatever, and the way which others using particularly AI are going to be manipulating all of that.
Indeed. So everybody, take care out there.
So my selection today is one that actually surprised me a little with regard to the format. You're going to understand in a moment what that is. So it's from a platform called marketingdive.com, and this was a mini article written by 𝗧𝗵𝗲 𝗡𝗶𝗴𝗵, who is the associate editor, and 𝗧𝗵𝗲 𝗂𝗏, who's a news graphics developer. And it has a very kind of simple, intriguing title: Marketing in 2023, H1 by the numbers, and H1 being the first half of the year, as in Q1 or Q2. And what they've done is a compilation of stats and data that are there to illustrate the current mood and the current kind of motivations by businesses and marketers. And in fact, they've summarized their kind of selection with the subtitle "Measurement Uncertainty, Budget Changes, and Platform Shifts were top of mind." So they're looking at the first 6 months of the year. And then they've organized a number of data and stats into the groups of social commerce, YouTube versus TikTok, game mode, budgets, the consumer in 2023, and measurement uncertainty. And then what you have here then is, but it's a listicle really of stats with the source being quoted. And at first I was thinking, well, that doesn't take a lot of effort to do something like this. You could do something a lot better. But then I quickly corrected myself, because I thought, no, on the contrary, it takes a lot of time to find the stats. It takes a lot of time to choose and select and so on. And what they've done here is creating immense value by creating an article that you can scan read, and you don't have to necessarily react to all of them. You could share some of them with your colleagues back at work or your partners. And it reminded me a bit of what we do with In the News. So if you look back at the 6 months of In the News, in there we have a lot of stats as well that we've shared from different sources. And I was thinking, I might speak to Roger literally live during the recording about this idea of going back to all the In the News kind of segment for the last 6 months and picking out our best stats and creating maybe a mini article for LinkedIn or another. So for me, it was both a source of inspiration about what you can do in terms of repurposing something that would have taken you, in our case, 6 months together, with each episode, all the different stats, but also becoming a source of reflection. I'm not going to go through all the different groups of data, but because of the the kind of thread through with regard to In the News, I want to talk about the consumer in 2023 and get your reactions. So 4 stats that were shared in there. So 72% of consumers believe companies should sacrifice the bottom line to better serve them, from Gartner. 54% of Gen Z are trying to limit their time on social media. Gen Z and millennials look at more sustainability factors on labels and other consumers. And this is the one that I want to really kind of deep dive in if I could. 62% of consumers say they will stop buying from brands that compromise products to cut cost. And I have seen and I've been subjected to that compromise of a quality to cut cost quite recently in France, particularly, but in the UK. And as a result to which, I can no longer deal with that brand because I was so disappointed by the quality of the service or the product. But again, 62% of consumers say they will stop buying from brands that compromise products to cut costs.
Yes. Now, I mean, there's a lot of this going on at the moment, isn't there? I mean, in the UK, products are shrinking in size. Chocolate bars are getting smaller. Packets of crisps are getting smaller. I mean, I made a joke on Twitter a few weeks ago that, if this brand of crisps that I like reduces the number of crisps in a packet anymore, they'll actually be marketing buy an individually wrapped crisp from us. Seriously, is getting stupid. But there's also this undercurrent, isn't there? We see it in the news quite a lot, that supermarkets are cashing in on inflation by artificially increasing the prices that they charge to effectively reap back some of the profits that they lost during the pandemic, or indeed just to blatantly profiteer. and they're using inflation as a cover. We've seen recently, certainly in the UK, that the supermarkets who at one point were often the cheapest for petrol are now blatantly amongst the most expensive. And again, there's government pressure on the supermarkets to cut their petrol costs because it's obvious that they are not passing on the reduced oil prices. So I can absolutely get this, that consumers in a pretty serious crunch like we're in at the moment, where the cost of living is so high now, that they will be outraged by some of the pricing decisions. And that ties back to what we were saying earlier about the P of price. You can't, your price is what is important, and you want to make a revenue, but you can't take the P, as it were. And I think this stat is absolutely right. I think consumers will walk with their feet, and brands need to be careful how far they take it.
So what's exciting, it's about the independence, because there you are. You've been given many ways to go in, from data privacy all the way to product quality and that kind of things. But I remember I started to have doubts even when I used to eat a lot of porridge in the morning, and I was thinking, those sachets feel lighter.
Yes,
because you have that morning routine for years of lifting a sachet before putting into your cereal bowl, and you kind of go, what's going on? And sure enough, but even just 10 grams, but translate that to millions of sachets, and yet they charge the same price or a bit more. So I think for me, it's all about understanding what is going on currently, looking at either the, if you want to be kind, the accidental issues, or complete and obvious bad behavior from brands, and then what can you do as an independent to kind of walk through that open door to market yourself even more successfully.
Absolutely right. Yeah, these are fascinating statistics, and it is a bit like in the news. It'd be interesting to talk about 54% of a Gen Z are trying to limit their time on social media, but perhaps that's a discussion for another day.
No, absolutely. Now, listen, I was said many a time in the Two Geeks and Marketing podcast, none of this would be possible without the hard work of pioneers and visionaries from the distant and recent past. So let's move on to This Week in History.
In 1841, the British humorous and satirical magazine Punch is first published. It helped coin the term cartoon, which back then meant a finished preliminary sketch on a large piece of cardboard, or cartone in Italian.
Wow, I didn't know that. Well, 100 years later, in 1941, Tom and Jerry first appear under their own names in cartoon, The Midnight Snack, by William Hanna and Joseph Barbera.
In 1969, American astronaut Neil Armstrong becomes the first man to walk on the moon. He was joined by Buzz Aldrin 19 minutes later.
In 1988, Sweet Child of Mine by Guns N' Roses finally enters the Billboard Top 40 nearly after a year of touring and the release of the album Appetite for Destruction.
Sweet Child of Mine has got one of the best guitar riffs ever. That introduction, that that was a dreadful impression of it, but you know what I mean.
It is. And now, can I just share very, very briefly the coincidence that this should be an event back in time, when only 3 days ago, the time of recording, I was at the concert, Guns N' Roses concert in Paris, which was just amazing. 3.5 hours of entertainment, non-stop, 3.5 hours, 31 tracks played to one of the biggest arenas in Europe. So it was just, I couldn't believe it when I was doing the research that it should so happen. But for me, the message in that story is that they finally broke through, that important recognition and milestone of being part of the Billboard Top 40 a year after all the hard work of touring and the release of the album and so on. So what is interesting for me is a reminder that the success comes from the hard work. It's not the other way around. It's not because the song was successful and popular that they became famous. It was a year of touring and promoting the album that led to that breakthrough song of Sweet Child of Mine. And as urban legend would have it, Slash doesn't like the intro. Thinks it's a bit rubbish, but we all love it.
I mean, it is interesting, this, and I guess in the electronic and digital age now, where we have auto-tuning and we have computers that can create the music, there aren't that many bands who still do what the likes of the Beatles and the Who and the Clash from the 70s actually went out playing their own instruments night after night in pubs and small venues and built up a following and eventually got a record contract. Now it's all about immediacy, isn't it? A quick hit, bang, 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 and I want instant fame. And funnily enough, Trisha and I were talking about this the other day. We ended up watching some. That was right. We had a few power cuts over the weekend. In fact, on Saturday night the power was out for about 8 hours. So we were listening to Live Aid on our phones, just as something to do. And obviously we got talking. There's still quite a lot of the artists that appeared at Live Aid, which is 38 years ago on the 13th of July since Live Aid. Quite a lot of those artists are still around and they're still touring and they're still getting out there. Okay, their voices might not be as good as they used to be. And you just think maybe a lot of the bands that we know today wouldn't be around in 38 years' time. And I think it's possibly because, again, those people who spent all that time, like Guns N' Roses did, touring and building up the expertise in musicianship and songwriting, there aren't any artists like that now. Not that many.
Not that many.
I can't think of many. It is all about that digital immediacy, and that hasn't got the same longevity.
We made the same comment actually with Denise. So when I came back, obviously completely hyper from the concert, and I bored Denise with the account minute by minute and track by track of the kind of this. It was just such an experience because you had the sound, you had obviously this incredible what they do nowadays, as you know, with the video segments and some of the animations, and of course, getting on with the singing as well. And we made the same link with the fact that there are musicians as part of the band, not just a performer, and that we made the same link. And back to what we're trying to do with Two Geeks Marketing Podcast, which is the craft in, forgive me if I may, blogging, the craft in doing a video for YouTube and so on, comes through basically doing it over and over and over again. And there are no shortcuts. If there were shortcuts, we would have found them by now. 2023, if there were shortcuts, Roger, we would know them and we would share them. And what I find difficult for me, as you mentioned, nearly 30 years career in digital marketing, there seems to be always a bit of a moment of storm and chaos with the evolution of digital. So at the moment, we're going through the storm and chaos of AI, and I can't wait for it to settle. But it's still motivated by this idea that if I use AI, I can literally kind of cheat my way through some form of recognition and success, when in fact, everybody tells you, I mean, if you bother listening to filmmakers, documentary makers, writers, authors, Stephen King, which I know you're a big fan of, they all say you just have to put the work in.
Yeah, absolutely right. Absolutely right. Before we go on to the next section, Punch magazine. Didn't realize it was that old, but I might be completely wrong here, but didn't Punch used to have, or maybe it still was it the magazine that started Let's Parler Franglais?
Yeah, because Punch? It was inspired by French version of being satirical, and let's remember it was very brave and daring back in 1841 to mock the political class and would have been still remnants of monarchy as well. But yeah, it was inspired by French kind of magazine, printed publication. Yeah,
so that's a schoolboy memory for me, because at school I did French as a subject, but my English teacher Steve Plowes, who really inspired me to write stuff even from an early age, he would often pick up the pages from Punch and read out the Franglais bit. Much to the annoyance of the French teacher, because we would all then start trying to talk Franglais rather than proper French. But I always used to remember it was hilarious how they managed to mix the English and the French together to create something really quite funny. So great memory that's just jolted back to the forefront of my mind.
Do you know what's extraordinary? I mean, first, thank you. I didn't know that cartoon came from the Italian cartones, so I'll be even better at the next quiz, if there is one. But the longevity again, because this lasted till the early 2000s. Punch. There was a small break until they got an investor. And of course, I think they couldn't quite manage transition to digital, but that's a serious long run for a magazine, and it's known. I mean, people who never read Punch know of its existence.
Yeah, absolutely right.
Always a pleasure, but we're going to get back into the present, Roger. So let's move on, if you don't mind, with marketing, tech, and apps. And in this segment, we surprise each other with a discovery from the intro of something that can help us be faster and more productive content creators. So, Roger, what is your selection for this week?
We have to talk about Threads, the Threads app, Pascal. Okay, so we've talked about Twitter quite a lot here on Two Geeks in the Marketing Podcast, the fact that Elon Musk took it over, he's made a few mistakes. I've been on Twitter since the very beginning. I've just got shy of 10,000 followers, but for the last 6 months at least, I've found Twitter has become an even more polluted cesspit of right-wing nut jobs and vaccine conspiracy theorists. And of course, it would appear that Meta and Zuckerberg have predicted the demise of Twitter and thought we need to get a Twitter clone out there. And let's face it, Meta have got form, haven't they, at copying stuff. They copied Snapchat to create Instagram stories. And they have effectively created this app called Threads, which is an absolute Twitter clone. I mean, I believe that that Twitter are considering suing them because it is so similar. But it's a blatant copy, as you would expect. However, it bears having a look at, and because we're at the forefront of what we're trying to do, I thought I'd better dive in and take a look. So I downloaded the app the day it was launched. It's only about a week ago, and one of the innovative things was that it's linked to your Instagram account, and you can immediately follow all your Instagram followers and vice versa, so that you've instantly got part of your audience there. Whereas where I've tried some of these other Twitter clones before, like Blue Sky and Mastodon, it's genuinely starting from scratch and very hard to start again to build up a series of followers, especially as the likes of Mastodon don't actually make it very easy to find you people. So I immediately managed to get something like 400 followers on Threads. So the conversation started immediately. And quite honestly, for a day or two, Threads was pretty all-consuming. I had to turn the notifications off in the end because they were constantly coming up. And it did feel to me as if it was very much like Twitter was right back at the beginning. So no adverts, no suggestions. And I think Meta are genuinely trying to keep it ad-free for the time being. Although let's not be fooled that eventually there will be ads. But it genuinely did feel to me like Twitter in the early days. However, because it was only, I guess, that percentage of people that I follow on Instagram who immediately went and got it and then immediately became part of my followers and me following them and back and everything, it very much felt like an echo chamber of people like me who were just there to experiment with it. And that first couple of days of really intense interaction has effectively died out now, and it's settled down. And what I see is quite a nice environment without all the political crap and without all the vaccine conspiracies. But I'm just not sure whether people will, if Twitter survives, and let's face it, there's a big question mark over whether it does. I don't know whether people will pile over to Threads despite the massive signups they got, because even though you can import some of your followers from Instagram, I think it takes a lot of work, especially for people who have got big Twitter followings, to effectively have to start from scratch, or maybe with a boost of a few hundred from Instagram or however many it might be to actually get there. So let's keep an eye on Threads. Maybe Zuckerberg could make this special by making a commitment to the world that this will not have adverts in it. It will not become politicized algorithm wise, and it will be a safe place, in which case I'd quite like that. But if he piles in the adverts after a few weeks and then starts all the algorithm nonsense going on, it'll genuinely just degenerate into a clone of Twitter, and why would you bother? The second thing I wanted to talk about today is another app that I came across, probably as a result of that article that I talked about in Content Spotlights, and this is an app called Midjourney. And basically, it is the photo version of ChatGPT. So obviously in ChatGPT, if you go into it, you can say, write me an article about Casino Royale, blah, 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 and it will give you an article about Casino Royale. With Midjourney, you basically prompt it, and it will create a picture for you. And you can ask it to create a cartoon, fitting in with what we said earlier. You can ask it to create a piece of artwork, so it makes it look like an oil painting or something like that. Or you can ask it to create a photorealistic image. So I downloaded this, and obviously the free version has adverts in it, and that's the most annoying thing straight away, is that some of the ads are about 3.5 minutes long and you can't skip them. So you enter prompts. So I tried businessman on a train platform with a storm brewing in the background. 3 minutes later, here's a photograph of a businessman stood on a platform with a train coming up behind him and wind. So it does work. I have to say, though, I haven't been very impressed with some of the images that I've created so far, albeit we're talking about a sample of no more than 15. It doesn't look particularly realistic. Even the photorealistic ones look to me like definite simulations. And I have read articles. There's apparently been a guy who's used Midjourney to prove a point by creating an image of Barack Obama and Donald Trump actually having an affair with somebody. So you've got Barack Obama kissing this woman stood in lingerie and stockings and everything, and that actually looked quite realistic. So maybe I haven't prompted Midjourney properly, but from what I've seen so far, it's an interesting little toy to play with, but didn't particularly impress me. Definitely wouldn't replace a properly shot photograph on a train platform with a businessman or anything like that. But again, it's early days, isn't it? So in the same way as we'll be keeping an eye on Threads, let's keep an eye on Midjourney and see how it develops.
Thank you very much. And we obviously don't communicate and share what we're going to talk about. We just populate the show notes. And every so often, and that makes sense, we'll end up talking about or sharing about the same things. So my selection is about approaching AI tools differently. But before I move on to my selection, thank you very much about Threads. If I may, and this might need to be more of a content spotlight moment, I think they've got their marketing completely wrong about Threads. And briefly, I'll tell you that it still remains the fact that Twitter is one of the smallest social network out there by comparison to the others. So what you'd be worried about stealing and poaching Twitter users, when actually it suggests to me that there's an entire global population who's ignored Twitter completely, and you should be going after them or convert your last users of Instagram and Messenger maybe and Facebook's. But as for another time, I want to talk to you about what I have seen happening over and over and over again with the evolution of digital, which is misunderstanding that may come from misinformation. So, I've said what we had to say about ChatGPT, both in this show and the AI special. And I think it's all to do with the language. And you've used the term a moment ago, the prompt. Isn't that fascinating, Roger, that whenever there's something brand new, there's some new vocabulary that we've never used before in our lives, which of course then is going to lead to people being a bit suspicious. What wouldn't you be? So I'm going to really mention two platforms following, the kind of preface, with this idea of you've got to completely change your mindset and change the approach. Is this idea of forget about AI and use the term digital assistant, which has been around for a lot longer, by the way, because we've had them on our phones, for much longer. And this digital assistant's job, if you will, is to jog your memory or to encourage you or to stimulate your creativity. That's essentially, what they're there to do. And if you want to get the best out of your assistant, you've got to be even better at briefing and giving instruction to the assistant, because the more enigmatic or succinct you are, the less someone can help you. And I'm talking about a real person, and as well. And of course, the effort has been here to go for natural language, but that makes it even harder to use those platforms. So in the case of Midjourney and some of the photographers who have kind of wanted to prove the point, if you read the instruction they've given, they go on forever. They give specs about the cameras they should use and the kind of film and so. If you don't know what you're talking about, you can't get the best out of your digital assistant. So it's an interesting one for me to kind of explore, and it's just been my career to challenge the language and so on. So the two platforms that can help you understand how to be better at briefing and compiling instructions for your assistants are as follows. You have a platform called FlowGPT. Flow as in the rivers flowing, and this is I think a team of volunteers, for what it would seem. They've compiled a library of AI prompts, that word again. But what you do here is essentially get inspiration for all those who have tried to get good value and good results from any platform. It could be ChatGPT, Bard, Claude, and all the others. As an aside, by the way, if you're going to be creating an AI platform to give you good, credible answers, I would use a woman's name. We all know that women are much smarter than men anyway. So why go for always Bard or Claude or all that kind of things? So a vast library. Be careful. It could be like sucking up so much of your time. So go in with a clear idea of the kind of briefing you want to be able to write, because you'll have to write it, and then search it accordingly. FlowGPT is busy. It can be a bit overwhelming. So I found another one, a bit simpler in terms of the interface, more visual, called Logic Balls, and no laughing in the back of the room. So Logic Balls, again, run by a team of individuals, have gone about this business of discovering and reviewing free AI powered apps and tools that are there to unlock your creative potential. So they won't do the work for you, but what they will do is give you a steer towards how to potentially write instructions for Midjourney, ChatGPT, and many others. But please understand, it's about looking after, if I may be so bold, a digital assistant.
Yeah, let's also not buy courses by people for $97. A million ChatGPT prompts or a million Midjourney prompts. Buy my course for $97. Crikey, even by the end of the first day of threads being out there, and I put a jokey tweet up, or jokey thread, whatever they call it, thread up there, saying how long will it be before somebody comes up with a course on how to use threads for $97. By the end of the day, I saw a post from somebody on LinkedIn claiming to be a threads expert. You've got to be very, very careful that this sort of jumping on the bandwagon expert oblique guru thing that's going on at the moment is just becoming ridiculous. So it's much better to focus on something like this, like FlowGPT and Logic Balls, where people are genuinely trying to help rather than just cashing in and claiming to be an expert on something that actually probably know nothing about.
Yeah, superb. Listen, this has flown by because we have reached the last segment of Two Geeks and a Marketing podcast, film marketing, just after this. So, Roger, you chose Casino Royale, released in 2006. Feels like an eternity ago. Let's watch a trailer.
Your file shows no kills. But to become a 00, it takes 2. How did you die? Your contact? Not well. You needn't worry. The second is... Yes. Considerably.
The man was 𝗧𝗵𝗲, private banker to the world's terrorists, which would explain how he could set up a high-stakes poker game at Casino Royale in Montenegro. If he loses this game, he'll have nowhere to run. You're the best player in the service.
The Treasury has agreed to stake you in the game. But if you lose, our government will have directly financed terrorism. I will be keeping my eye on our government's money and off your perfectly formed house.
You noticed. I hope our little game isn't causing you to perspire.
It doesn't bother you killing those people.
Well, I wouldn't be very good at my job if it did.
Has our girl melted your cold heart yet? James, get the girl out.
You're not going to let me in there. You've got your armor back on.
I have no armor left. You've stripped it from me. Whatever is left of me. Whatever I am. I'm yours.
The only question remains. Will you yield? In time?
Wow.
What a film. What a film. Yeah, like you, Pascal, I can't believe that we're coming up to 18 years since Casino Royale and Daniel Craig's debut as James Bond. Again, watching that trailer, it was such a landmark moment, wasn't it? It was a complete reboot of the franchise. The previous Pierce Brosnan on his way out, completely new direction with Daniel Craig coming in. And I mean, I think I remember at the time quite a lot of people saying, well, Daniel Craig's not a James Bond. James Bond's not blonde hair. He's got black hair, doesn't look like Sean Connery, doesn't look like Dalton, Brosnan, etc. This isn't going to work. But I think that the quality of the film that we got was probably absolutely necessary to carry off the complete reboot that they had in mind. I think had the film been a bit of a mediocre film, it could have killed the franchise completely. So on the one hand, they made a very brave decision to try and reinvigorate it and take it in a different direction, but they also had a lot of pressure on them to create an absolutely standout movie. And I think they succeeded on both counts.
I think, we forget because now we've had the pleasure of all the others, including No Time to Die, reviewed on Two Geeks 𝗓𝗏 podcast, and Skyfall and all the others. The pressure, perhaps now is just, a vague memories for the producers and filmmakers, but it was real. I remember it was particularly print media that was pretty scathing about Daniel Craig. And I was completely confused, a bit like, earlier within the news, I was thinking, well, do you not watch movies like I do? Have you not seen Layer Cake, for example? Why do you have such a strong position? It was such ill-informed. I was completely, confused by the whole thing. I just couldn't wait to see it. And you talk about, being brave. The whole movie feels like a series of brave decisions. To begin with, from the title, Casino Royale. This is almost like the cursed movie, because it exists, as we know, as this kind of bizarre kind of construct of a comedy that I couldn't watch all of it. I was too embarrassed, So you've got that. You've got obviously, the decisions around the actor, although that you were always going to have naysayers, but also the storytelling, the grittiness, the violence, but also I want to spend some time with you on that. The whole opening, the first quarter of an hour, 20 minutes is so very different, and they had to do that.
Yeah, and okay, so assuming that they've taken this decision, it's a complete reboot. So the very first scene is almost going back to the day that James Bond was promoted to being a 00 agent. And that's when he became 007. And actually, unless you've read the original book of Casino Royale, the first James Bond book, you wouldn't know that in order to become a 00, you have to make 2 kills. And of course, the pre-credit sequence is James Bond making those 2 kills. So immediately you know that in this reboot, this is at the moment that James Bond becomes a 00, Whereas I guess in all the movies in the past, he'd already made that leap to being the 000 agent. We only get M, played by Judi Dench, as the surviving character from the rest of the franchise earlier on. So we don't have a Q, we don't have a Miss Moneypenny, and I suppose we have Felix Leiter, but it's a different actor, so I don't include that. But in as far as that was concerned, it was a completely different movie, and we didn't really even get the James Bond theme until right at the end.
I know.
You know, we might get the odd little bit of the maybe during the film at significant points, but it wasn't the full blown theme until right at the end. So you definitely knew you were seeing something different. But yes, much more physical violence. That first sequence, you know, it's exhausting to watch it. It's exciting. Don't get me wrong. It's one of the most exciting chase sequences I've ever seen in a movie, but you genuinely see them getting hurt, and it's physical violence, isn't it? And
quite. I mean, all the practical effects. You're right. Practical effects, bruises. I mean, I thought, you know, back to Brave Decisions. So the first element is in black and white, very grainy as well.
Yes,
almost like you think, have they made a mistake somehow? And the way they introduced the gun barrels was very, very clever. Then we get into the 𝗧𝗵𝗶, but within moments we went to Madagascar. And I knew, because actually that the marketing did lean on some of that sequence with the French parkour creator Sébastien Foucan when they are chasing each other. I mean, and taking incredible risks, you know, including the stunt doubles and so on. And so within the first quarter of an hour, you go, "All right, this is a different universe. This is a different Bond." All right, I'm all yours. Take me on this ride into, you know, what you are reinventing for us.
Yeah, and I found an article when I was doing the research for this about the significant change in cinematography in Casino Royale, which perhaps until I read this article, I hadn't conceived of the massive change, even though it's obvious when you watch it. So I'll link it to it in the show notes, and suffice to say that this article is very detailed, and it strips down quite a few of the scenes within the movie and shows you how it would have been shot in a previous Bond film compared to how it's shot in Casino Royale, and you can see the difference. And again, you wouldn't know this as a general watcher of these movies, but quite a lot of the earlier James Bond films, even though they were very exciting and they had a lot of action, quite a lot of the scenes were very static. So, you know, you had M's office, and it was often quite a long shot with James Bond walking across to the desk and M sat behind the desk. Or if they were in a casino, it would be a long shot of the casino, then quite close up. If you watch Casino Royale, there's so much more movement. The camera follows the people around. The lighting is much more important in all the scenes. The mood, the lighting, think about the scene on the train with Vesper Lynd as they go to Montenegro compared to the scene where he's being tortured by Le Chiffre at the end. The lighting and the mood, it's all so much more planned than ever before. In fact, again, you watch quite a lot of the earlier Bond movies, and actually you realize how quite bright they all are and glossy, whereas this was really rugged and really down to earth. And I think that highlights that complete and utter transformation. And as a cinematographer and a film producer yourself, you would notice that more than most people, but this article really rammed it home to me how much of a difference that made.
That's lovely, because you're right. You know, that they even went as far as, which is now almost a given, different color palettes for different emotions, different locations, and so on. So it's, in a way, for me, as I'm listening to you, it's almost a movie where they had to break some rules to surprise the character himself. Break rules. I mean, when he literally breaks into M's apartment,
yes.
You know, so we talk about they're not in the office, they're literally in her apartment, you know, private quarters.
Yes.
He even breaks into her computer systems. So by extension, have they broken any rules, or have they been brave with the marketing itself?
Well, I actually found it quite hard to find much about the marketing of this film, which surprised me. I thought that it was such a big hit and they made such a big deal about rebooting it. I just thought I would be able to find an absolute treasure trove of stuff. But actually, when it comes down to it, a lot of it revolves around the poster and the trailer. And then I guess the big promotional elements came in from the brands that were working with them in the product slots within the film. So we'll just go through very briefly. The poster is, I love this poster. It is actually quite simple. It's got a white background with the 007 and the gun motif sort of faded into the background. There's a proper shot of Daniel Craig wearing his tux, but with his bow tie untied, which I thought was quite cool, looking very much like you would expect James Bond to be. But then the intriguing part of the poster is in the background. You can see the Aston Martin car, you can see the Gothic style building of the casino hotel itself, but those background images are actually within the silhouette of Vesper, played by Eva Green. You don't see her face, you just see her outline. And to me, that is evocative of the massive, massive presence that this character of Vesper Lynd has. I mean, if you think back to all the earlier James Bond films, with the exception of Tracy, I guess, who has been referenced in Bond films after that he was married to her, etc., etc., Vesper Lynd plays such an incredibly important and emotional part in Casino Royale that she is still felt in all of the others that came after. Even up to the end of No Time to Die, Vesper Lynd was still part of Daniel Craig's era. And that poster, to me, with her silhouette in the background, is almost a premonition of that. Her silhouette is there all the time. I think I'm sure they didn't have that in mind when they designed the poster, but that's the way it feels to me.
And now that you're saying this, thank you very much, because I didn't appreciate as well. That makes sense then for her to be so present in the trailer, because I was thinking, as someone who's watched it again only yesterday in 2023, that trailer is awfully full of spoilers. I mean, you can literally watch the trailer and go, what's the point of going to see Casino Royale? And you could be forgiven to think, well, there's a lot of her character in that trailer, and what about it's meant to be a Bond movie? But I think this back to this idea of watch the film and then look back at the posters and the trailers, and you get that extra reward, as we've mentioned time and time again.
Yeah, I mean, you look back now, and it was a James Bond film, but ultimately it was probably more than ever a genuine love story between man and woman. Whereas a lot of the James Bond films in the past, the women have just been there to have the closing shag at the end of the film. There was always, the closing shag at the end of the film, but this is, it is key to the entire look and feel of the film. And I suppose that then takes you into the, beyond the trailer, beyond the poster, it's hard to find anything else that the producers did. Now, the website long since has gone. There is a sort of mini website on the 007 official website, but not the original Casino Royale website. The only thing I could find that still exists, believe it or not, is the Casino Royale Facebook page, but that hasn't really got much on it. So the rest of the marketing around the film was actually done by some of the products that were placed within the film. Now, we've said before that James Bond films pioneered product placement, way back to the beginning of Dr. No and Goldfinger and From Russia with Love. They were placing products within the films. I can remember in Moonraker, significant adverts for British Airways appearing in that film. In Casino Royale, we've got 6 brands that mainly take center stage. There's Heineken, Ford, Smirnoff vodka, Sony Ericsson, and Omega watches. And you can't help, I mean, sometimes it's almost blatant how they have a conversation about his watch when they're sat on the train at dinner. But each of these big brands ran their own significantly huge marketing campaigns. Now, those marketing campaigns were about their brands. So Heineken did a Casino Royale campaign, but it was about Heineken. It wasn't really about Casino Royale. But if you look at what they did, they actually created a advert which was obviously shot at the same time because it uses the same locations as the film. Maybe a slightly different feel, but it has 𝗏𝗲𝗻, played by Eva Green, effectively climbing the stairs in the hotel, trying to get to the hotel room, thinking that this Heineken bottle that's been sent up by the waiter is actually an assassination attempt, and she's trying to rescue Bond. So they almost created a completely separate mini film, and it's a really actually quite good advert, a little bit cheesy perhaps, but it works really well. And Heineken had their own website with a countdown clock to the world premiere, lots of pictures of 𝗏𝗲𝗻. There was a quiz built into it, like who's your favourite Bond girl, 𝗏𝗲𝗻, Mary Goodnight, Jinx, 𝗍 on a top, 𝗓𝗏 galore, etc. Obviously, it was promoting Heineken. So to me, it was very much a film that was marketed by the partners as opposed to marketed by the producers, assuming that there wasn't anything that I've missed, but I couldn't find anything other than the poster and the trailers.
No, and talking about breaking rules, or so to speak, restraint being maybe something that they wanted to do to accompany the film, and do something that I would go as far as saying is more elegant than sometime, to use M's expression, blunt instruments of previous iteration of Bond, where sometimes it was so distracting, because some of the brand positioning was in the double figures, and you can be distracted by, drinks and cars and that kind of things. What I think is probably telling us is that there was a lot of print media, because my memory, particularly around this idea of people being quite negative about Daniel Craig, there was a lot of interviews with the producers, particularly Barbara Broccoli, taking over from her dad, and the directors about how they wanted to protect the franchise and the brand, but how they wanted to move on with the times. So I remember reading a lot of articles, at the time I was buying film magazines like Impact and Total Film and so on. But the web, 2006, we only give or take 10 years onto the web being public to the point that we know it. So that would make a lot of sense. But maybe it's back to this idea of it was a very tight and well controlled marketing campaign. They didn't have maybe the abundance, because that could have been tempting, couldn't it, Roger? You relaunch the Bond franchise 4 years after a 4-year break, temptations to go all out, all big, and maybe it served them well to kind of keep it quite confined.
Yeah, and I can remember, obviously, at the time on TV, seeing the shot of Daniel Craig coming out of the water with his perfectly preserved torso. That must have been a TV shot or a TV slot or whatever at the time, but I couldn't find any of those. So, some other interesting stuff, which isn't really marketing related, but it did catch my attention, that film geeks like us would look at. There's a fabulous article on Den of Geek about Casino Royale, claiming that it's actually 3 films within one. And this guy actually says there's a movie about the plane, which is the first bit, where he rescues the sky plane. There's the second part, which he calls the poker game. And then there's the third film, which is set in Venice. And what he says, that each of these 3 sections could actually almost stand alone. And interestingly enough, there's only Bond and later 𝗏𝗲𝗻 that figure prominently in any 2 of those. So this film is less a beginning, middle, and end, and more a film 1, film 2, film 3, which I thought would probably legitimize us having a chat all on its own. Some other really interesting trivia that I just thought was quite fascinating was, obviously, there's the quite cheesy cameo by Richard Branson during the film. So blink and miss it, and of course the pettiness of corporate relations. But apparently, when British Airways showed the film on their planes, they edited that bit out because they didn't want their customers to be seeing Richard Branson. I even believe there's the shot of a Virgin plane in one of the scenes at Miami Airport that they actually digitally changed to make it a different airline. So I thought that was extremely petty. This Bond film had the most BAFTA nominations for a Bond film ever, total of 9. The original book The game of cards they played was baccarat, or chemin de fer, I guess is the French way of saying it, whereas they changed it to Texas Hold'em poker. Now, I don't understand how either game works, to be perfectly honest, but what I do like is that in Texas Hold'em, apparently a pair of eights is called an 𝗧𝗵𝗲𝗀𝗃, which is quite a nice tie back to an earlier James Bond film. One afternoon of shooting, they destroyed 3 Aston Martin DBS cars, valued at 300 grand each. So you can tell that's a lot.
So they demolished nearly £1 million worth of cars in one afternoon.
Cars, yeah. Obviously, music. You Know My Name. Great theme tune. Loved it. Was the first Bond film since Dr. No that didn't have scantily clad women flying around on the screen. Some great dialogue. I think you picked up this bit. Vesper's on the train. She says, "I'm the money," and James Bond says, "Every penny of it." Maybe that's a little nod to the fact that Miss Moneypenny isn't in the film. And obviously, you've already made reference to the parkour free running bloke who was just absolutely amazing. And then, of course, the final line in the movie just before the credits and the full James Bond film crash in. The name is Bond, James Bond. Absolutely superb.
And you know that this could be a false memory, but I'm absolutely convinced I read articles where they were torn about whether this should be the end, as in when he catches Mr. White and introduces his name, or should it be the beginning of Quantum of Solace? You know, they were torn between the two, and I'm so glad they chose for the latter. Well, let's give the audience what they've been waiting, because this is also a long movie. It's nearly 2.5 hours, which is another very brave decision. So let give the audience, the final kind of salute introduction, and then you're right. The moment he finishes that line, it cuts to the James Bond theme we've been listening since 1962. So wow, thank you, Roger. It was just brilliant to not only watch it again recently, and it was delightful because you watch it with the information knowledge of what's coming next. So some of the lines, and when they are confused by the network and they don't know who's behind all of this and so on, but we know, makes watching Casino Royale even more enjoyable. So thank you very much for choosing that for today's episode 102 of Two Geeks and the Marketing Podcast.
Fantastic. It was such a trip down memory lane for such a great movie.
Thank you. And thank you for watching and listening to Two Geeks and a Marketing Podcast. Really, truly appreciate your support. So please subscribe if you haven't already. Leave your comments and suggestions in usual places. Until the next time, go out there and make sure your marketing is done right. I was Pascal 𝗏𝗏, and he was Roger Edwards.